Hello everybody! Before I start this review, I'm sure you all are wondering, why the heck am I doing a review for Man of Steel? That movie came out 4 years ago. What is this? Why is this happening now? Why? Well, to answer all those few of you that asked that question, it is because Wonder Woman is coming out in June of this year. It's the 4th film in the DC Extended Universe, the new universe that got started with Man of Steel, and it's been a big thing in film ever since 2013. Ever since 2015, people have been talking about these DC movies that have been happening, the new universe that's been starting up, what works about the universe, and what doesn't work about the universe, and since Wonder Woman is coming out in a few months, it's coming out in June, I wanted to give my takes on the DC movies that have come out so far, but you all must be wondering, hey, you already reviewed Batman v Superman and Suicide Squad last year. Yeah, well, those reviews suck. They're really bad. Every single DCEU movie that's come out, my thoughts have changed about every single one. When I first saw Man of Steel, I loved the movie. I thought it was incredible. I thought it was one of the best comic book movies ever made. And then after several rewatches, there are things that don't work about this movie. It's not a perfect movie. And also with Batman v Superman, I didn't love it, but I liked it, even though that movie's not very good. And Suicide Squad, I was a huge fanboy with. I was obsessing over that movie, when in reality, it's not really that good. So I want to give my refreshing takes on the DCEU movies that have come out so far leading up to Wonder Woman. Now that I've given that disclaimer for these videos and announced what this is, I'm about to review Man of Steel now. So here we go with the review. Boom! Man of Steel is the Superman reboot that came out in 2013. It is the movie that started off the DC universe. It was announced that this is going to be the first movie in a universe of DC movies similar to Marvel. And this movie is directed by Zack Snyder and stars Henry Cavill, Amy Adams, Lawrence Fishburne, what's his name? That other dude, Michael Shannon, Kevin Costner, Russell Crowe. Crazy cast in this movie. And it is literally the origin story of Superman. It's about how he was on Krypton, he's an alien, and he goes to Earth, he gets sent to Earth after Krypton destroys, and he basically becomes this superhero who doesn't know that he's a superhero, and he sort of figures out he is all these superhero things, and he figures out what his destiny is and all that. Yay! It's the Superman origin story that we've already seen in 1970, whenever the first movie came out. So guys, Man of Steel is one of the most polarizing movies ever made, probably. This movie opened up to very mixed reception. There were a lot of people that loved this movie and thought it was the best Superman movie to date. And other people thought it was the worst comic book movie like ever made. It was one of the worst comic book movies of all time. People hate on this movie, or they really liked it. It's so split. And I'm here to give my thoughts on this movie because not only has this movie given mixed reception, but also the other 2 DC movies that came after this got very mixed reviews as well. So what are my thoughts on this movie? What are the updated thoughts on Man of Steel ever since I saw it way back in 2013? Well, let's start with the pros first. The intro to this movie, I really like. The intro to this movie is by far one of the best parts of the movie. The intro where it shows Krypton and all the visuals look fantastic, and it sets up General Zod's motivation, and it sets up Russell Crowe as Superman's father. They set up all these things that are gonna be in the movie, and it was a really cool interpretation of Krypton, and you get kind of sad when Krypton gets blown up, because it's like, hey, that looks like a cool planet with cool things on it. And it's actually kind of a heartbreaking opening. I really liked the opening of this movie. It had a very different interpretation of Krypton than we've seen before. But the really mixed characters in this movie are Henry Cavill as Superman, Amy Adams as Lois Lane, and Michael Shannon as the villain of this movie, General Zod. And here's my thoughts on these characters. Henry Cavill, I actually think is pretty good as Superman. Is he anything great? Not really. He's not anything spectacular. He doesn't in any way surpass Christopher Reeve. He's just kind of fine in this movie. They went the subtle route. They went the subtle, mysterious route with his character, which, if they do that right in movies, I'm all for. Michael Keaton's Batman is so subtle. He's so introverted, and you can tell he's gone through a world of hurt in his past, and I really like that subtle Batman take. It was different than Christian Bale's Batman, but it was really good, I thought. I think with this movie, Zack Snyder was sort of trying to make Superman more of a subtle, mysterious character that's been through a lot in his past. And I really like that idea. I think Henry Cavill does a pretty good job in this movie. As for Amy Adams as Lois Lane, she's also fine. She's nothing great, she's nothing amazing, she's kind of like Henry Cavill. She's just fine in the role. She has a few really good scenes, she has a few scenes that aren't so good, but I think she did a pretty good job in this movie. Michael Shannon is one of the things that receives a lot of hate in Man of Steel, and I don't really get why, to be completely honest. I actually like this villain a lot. I think he has really good motivation. You can see where he's coming from. You understand why he wants to resurrect Krypton, because it was so dear to him, and then he lost it, and his motivation makes really good sense, I thought. I actually think Zod is really good in this movie. I don't understand the hate towards Michael Shannon in this film. I actually thought he played a pretty good villain. The first act of this movie is actually pretty good stuff, where they have flashbacks to Superman's past as a kid. I actually really like that. They told it like Batman Begins. Yes, it's very similar to Batman Begins, but I actually liked it. I thought it was actually pretty cool. To those people who say Henry Cavill was given no characterization in this movie, I don't get that, honestly. They had a whole first act setting up this character with flashbacks and all kinds of things setting up this character, and I think that the character had a lot of good meat in the first act of this movie, where they have the flashbacks. I thought it worked very well, and it was a good thing to actually make Superman's character have some meat to him. Could I have wanted more meat to Superman's character in this movie? Absolutely. I feel like his character could have used a lot more depth, but I felt like he did have a decent amount of depth. I don't understand why everyone straight up hates Henry Cavill as Superman. Every Zack Snyder movie is visually stunning, and Man of Steel has beautiful visuals. This movie looks fantastic, especially Krypton looks fantastic, and everything else looks great. It looks marvelous. It looks like it's a fantastic looking movie, like every other Zack Snyder movie. The action is another thing people complain about in this movie. The entire like second half of this movie is just full action, and I think for what it is, it's really good stuff. The main complaint about Man of Steel is that Superman doesn't kill people, he saves them. But when two god figures from another planet fight on Earth, there's gonna be some destruction. There's gonna be some blown up things. Could they have had a little bit less destruction than they did? Sure. But I think when two gods fight in a city, there's gonna be a lot of destruction. So I don't really get the destruction complaint. There is a little bit too much of it, yes. But if this sort of thing happened in real life, there's gonna be some destruction. There's gonna be some consequences. Another major complaint that Man of Steel gets is Superman killing General Zod. And I absolutely don't get this complaint at all. It's at the end of the movie, he kills General Zod because he's about to kill this family, and he breaks his neck at the end of the movie, and people were like, oh my gosh, Superman doesn't kill. But in this sort of situation, what do you think he was gonna do to Zod? I mean, if he was in this sort of situation, I feel like it's perfectly fine for him to have to kill Zod. Zod was destroying things, he was causing more deaths than ever, and it was probably a good thing that Superman actually killed him, and I don't mind that complaint, especially because in the original Superman 2 in the 80s, spoilers for that movie if you somehow haven't seen a movie that's like 30 years old, that movie, Superman kills General Zod at the end of it, so it's like, I don't get the complaint. I actually find it a good character thing in this movie. The only flaw with it is that I wish that Superman could have, like, experienced something from killing this man. There was never a moment where Superman, like, sat down and went like, oh my gosh, I killed somebody, I'm never gonna do that again. There was never a moment like that, and that's probably my problem with it. I felt like if that moment was there, it would give a good reason for Superman to never want to kill somebody again. I wish that was in the movie, but overall, I don't mind that he kills Zod. And those are my pros with this movie, because as you know, Man of Steel does have a lot of cons. There are a lot of things about this movie that don't work. I already mentioned a few of them. For me, this movie is about as good as the Marvel Cinematic Universe's Thor. I think it's about as good as those movies. There are things about this movie that work, and there are things about this movie that don't, just like the two Thor movies. It's not a great film. It's got a lot of problems, but I do think it's enjoyable for what it is. One of the major complaints that Man of Steel gets is that this movie is way too dark. It's way too realistic, it's way too gritty and dark, and it's way too just brooding and evil and gritty and bleh. And to be completely honest, I don't mind the switch of the tone. I don't mind that they switched it to a dark, serious tone. I feel like that could work if done well, if they balance it out with humor and fun things. But I feel like in this movie, it's way too dark. There's basically no humor in this movie. I feel like if you want to make a Superman movie that's more realistic, that's fine. But you gotta balance it out with some humor. You gotta balance it out with some lighthearted things. In this movie, it's basically just all depressing. And it's like, that doesn't really fit for Superman, really. Even The Dark Knight, which is about Batman, one of the darkest superheroes, had more humor than Man of Steel did. And when Man of Steel does try to do humor, it really falls flat. It's really bad. Like, the one joke they make about Superman being hot towards the end of this movie was really cringeworthy. Every attempt at humor in this movie really falls flat. Like, even Lois Lane has really bad attempts at humors that just come off as awkward. And the lighthearted attempts in this movie really don't work. The movie is entirely dark, and I feel like this movie should have had more comedy. It should have been way more lighthearted. The romance in this movie is also pretty bad, unfortunately, which is a shame because it really worked well the first two Superman movies that came out in the 70s and the 80s. It's not like Henry Cavill and Amy Adams are bad in this movie. Like I mentioned, they're both fine actors. They both do a good job for what they're given. Are they great? Do they surpass Christopher Reeve and the original Lois Lane in any way? No, they absolutely don't. But in this movie, their chemistry just doesn't work. But I never really felt like they had any chemistry in this movie. There's all of a sudden a scene where Superman saves her and she's just like, oh, kiss. Yay, and it's sort of just like, where did this come from? I never had really an implication that they had a romance in this movie. Lois was curious about him because he was an alien and wanted to tell a story about him, but I never really saw a romantic connection between the two of them. So when a lot of things happen between them in this movie, it really doesn't work. Like the scene where General Zod brings Amy Adams on the ship. What was that for? Was it for him to torture Lois Lane to sort of get at Superman? Because he never does that, so I never understood why General Zod brings her on the ship with him. Lois Lane does do things in this movie. She's not a complete damsel in distress, but the romance between them really fell off. Like I said, the action is really good in this movie, but I feel like there's way too much of it. I honestly wanted a little bit of breathe room in between all the crazy action scenes to sort of get into Superman's character more, because he does not have as much characterization as he should have in this movie. Like I said, he's more subtle and mysterious, but I really felt like his character should have gotten way more characterization. We don't even see Clark Kent in this movie, really. And I wanted so much more from Superman's character in this movie. He's just fine in this movie. I felt like he could have been way better, especially because Christopher Reeve was fleshed out so much and you could relate to the character. There's no really relatability to Superman's character in this movie. He's kind of just this guy that had a rough past and he's mysterious and intriguing, but you don't get much for his character, and it's really unfortunate. There's a little bit too much action, and I felt like if they traded more action for scenes where they actually do character building, it would have been better. And one thing I forgot to mention is that as much as I love the action scenes in this movie, there's a lot of really good ones, but there are a lot of times during the action scenes where Zack Snyder will pointlessly click the zoom button and randomly zoom in on something that's happening and shake the camera around, and it was really weird and kind of annoying, actually. Like, when that happened during the movie, it really took me out of it, and it was like, oh yeah, this movie's being filmed. It was just kind of a pointless zoom that he did for no reason, and it didn't really work, and it was really annoying at times. It was one of my big problems with Man of Steel. And also, there is way too much product placement in this movie. It's all over the place. It's a thing that a lot of people complain about with this movie. There's an IHOP that Superman literally crashes into. There's just product placement all over the place, and there is way too much of it. It's just in your face all the time during the action scenes, and it really did get on my nerves after having rewatched this movie. Overall, though, I don't hate Man of Steel. People who say it's the worst comic book movie ever, have you seen a movie called Batman and Robin? Have you seen Fantastic? There are far worse superhero movies than Man of Steel. I think this is a good movie, actually. Is it great? Not even close. This movie is decent. There are a lot of problems that this movie has. I'm gonna give Man of Steel a B. Like I said, I don't dislike Man of Steel. I actually think this is a pretty decent superhero movie, but like I said, there are things I love about this movie, and there are things that I don't like so much about this movie. It's littered with problems, but for me, the positives outweigh the negatives, and I actually think Man of Steel is the best DCEU movie that we've had so far. So guys, if you like my review of Man of Steel, be sure to comment your thoughts on Man of Steel below, be sure to like this video, be sure to subscribe, and be sure to tune in next month for my review of Batman v Superman. That's gonna be a lot of fun because that's another really controversial movie that people either like it or they hate it. So it's gonna be interesting to talk about that, and then after that I'll be talking about Suicide Squad and then Wonder Woman. It's gonna happen in the span of around 3 months, and I'm excited to do that. So I hope you guys liked this review and want to see the reviews of the other movies. Alright guys, bye bye.